Mesachas Kesubos Daf Chav Daled wraps up the Gemara's discussion of Pesha Asa Pesha Hitter with an explanation of why we needed to talk about 4 different cases and what we can learn specifically from each one. Gemara will then move on to the sugya of establishing that a person is a Kohen, 3 different privileges that Kohanim have, and how we need to establish each of them, and contradiction in a brisa and a mishnah, and 4 resolutions. So let's begin the Gemara. The Gemara said we had 4 cases of Pesha Asar, who have Pesha Hitter. Again, Pesha Asar means that if you're the only one who created a situation of doubt against you, you are believed to resolve it. The 4 cases were the number 1, where someone says, this land used to belong to your father, but I bought it. Number 2, where witnesses say, yes, that's our signature, but it's invalid because we were psulim for whatever reason. Case 3 is where a woman says, I was married, but now I'm divorced. And case 4, where she says, I was captured, but I wasn't violated. So why do we need each of these 4? Why can't I just say one of them and learn that all the other ones, the concept of Pesha Asar works as well? So the Gemara says, if you'd only have the case of the man who said that this land used to be your father's, but I bought it, there's a clear understanding that he was most definitely saying one piece of testimony. He didn't come first to say something which is going to cost him money, and then later say, oh, I bought it. If he came and he said that this land wasn't mine, he was meaning to say together with it that I don't lose money because I bought it. He wasn't coming to say that at some point it was mine. It wasn't mine, meaning to get rid of his property, and then he wants to say, no, I changed my mind. So that's definitely clear that it's one testimony. I wouldn't necessarily say that in a different case where it doesn't stand to lose anything, that it's one testimony. Maybe the witnesses said, yes, these are our signatures. And then later they added, we were psulim at the time, but they didn't mean to say them as one, and therefore you could separate the 2. I could trust you when you say they're your signatures, and I can't trust you when you say that you were a apostle at the time you signed. Now, if I would have only had that case of the signatures, so there I might think that they are believed to say that we were psulim at the time because they're not affecting themselves. They're not saying testimony about themselves. They're saying about someone else. But who says that a person is believed to testify about himself, something which is relevant to his own relevance for his own rights? Who says he's believed to say the second half of a Pesha Asar? So therefore we have to say, we have to speak about the case of the land to show that it's also, not only is he believed in the case of the witnesses where it's testimony relevant to somebody else, but even in his own case, he is believed to say a testimony relative to himself. Now, the case of the women, that's talking about Isser, so you have to bring that case if I would have only had it in the case of monetary issues, I would not have known that Pesha Asar works in a case of Isser, so you have to mention that. Why do I need both cases, both where she says she's divorced and where she says she was captured but she wasn't violated? So the Gemara says, I need to have that last case to tell me the additional halacha, that if we allow her to go marry a Kohen, even though she was captured, because we're assuming that she wasn't violated, and therefore she's mutter to Kohanim, and then witnesses come and take away the Pesha Asar by establishing independently that she was captured, we don't make her get divorced from there. And that's halacha which we've seen in the Mishnah. So that's what that chiddush is for. So the Gemara rejects this. The Gemara says we had 2 opinions as to where that halacha was said. Was it said on the first case of where she says, I was married but I'm divorced, and then witnesses came and said that you were married? Or was it said in the case where she said she was captured and not violated, and witnesses came and established that she was captured? They had a machlokes on which of those 2 cases the halacha that if witnesses came, she doesn't have to leave the man that she married based on her Pesha Asar, which is now gone. So according to the opinion that it was said on the case of where she was married, where she said I was married but I was divorced, I have no reason for the last case where she said she was captured. What's the chiddush of that? So the Gemara says, okay, I'll tell you a different chiddush of that. The chiddush of that is that they have 2 women who are both captured and they testify for each other. They are believed. We're showing that we trust the one witness, even though it's a woman, and also the concept that we aren't afraid for a conspiracy. We aren't afraid that they made a deal. I'll testify for you, you testify for me, and then we'll both be okay. We both have something to gain. You don't have to show concern over that. Now, the Gemara says our last case here we just discussed is when 2 men come and they both say they're Kohanim, and each one testifies for the other, you're a Kohen. I say that one says the other's a Kohen, the other says that he's a Kohen. Why do we need that case? We've already established that people can testify for each other, and we're not concerned for this trickery deal to have been made. So the Gemara says, yeah, but that was a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim, whether or not we are concerned for that, we needed to show that there is a machlokes there. Now the Gemara is going to get into this machlokes more at length, and the Gemara doesn't do it off our Mishnah. The Gemara quotes a brisa. The brisa is talking about where people came, they were unknown, and they claimed that they are kohanim. Now, if they're kohanim, so there are primarily two main concerns. We'll see there's a third, but there's two main concerns. First of all, are they allowed to eat or be given truma? Only a kohen can be given truma. Only a kohen can eat truma. Second concern is yochsin. Are they allowed to marry a kosher woman? Now, Rashi understands that this to mean that they are not a mamzer or in a sin. Most Rishonim understand that they're not a chalal, that they're saying that they're a kohen. We don't suspect them being a mamzer. Just because you don't know who someone is doesn't mean you assume he's a mamzer. However, how do you know that he's not a chalal, and therefore his children would not have the status of kehuna? And any woman who marries him has to understand that her kids are going to be halalim. So for that, you need another level of believability. So this brisa says everybody agrees that you're allowed to, that when two men come and they say that we're each kohanim and I testify about the other that he's a kohen, everybody agrees that you cannot establish yuchsin based on that. You can't establish, let's go with the other Rishonim, you cannot establish that he's not a chalal based on that. And the Gemara explains there are high standards for yuchsin. Before we let people get married, we need a high level of proof. And therefore, just the fact that somebody else comes and says that you came with someone and each of you testify about the other, that is not enough to let you marry as a kohen. The question is, can you eat truma? And that's the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. Rabbi Yehuda says no, and the Chachamim say yes. The Chachamim say if they testify about each other, they can eat truma based on that, and Rabbi Yehuda says they do not. So the Gemara assumes that the reasoning is because Rabbi Yehuda is afraid that they made a deal between them, and the Chachamim are not concerned that they made a deal between them. So the Gemara says we have a contradictory, different sugya, where we show that Rabbi Yehuda is not afraid that they made a deal, and the Chachamim say there is a concern that they made a deal between them. What's that case? That case is not talking about Kohanim. That case is talking about we have two people came into a city selling grain, and one of them testified, they each testify about, well, you have one that testifies about the other. One says, my grain's no good, his grain is good. Mine is too fresh, it's not properly dried. Mine hasn't had truma taken from it, it's demai. The other one, he has truma taken from his is okay. So can you believe the person who's testifying or not? What's the potential concern? The potential concern is that he's testifying for the other guy in this town. When they go to the next town, the other guy will return the favor, and he'll testify about the person who's testifying here. And that way each can sell their grain in one town. They make this deal because they are viewed as being believable when they say that mine is no good. Why would I say mine is no good? I must be such an honest guy. Therefore, trust me when I say his is good. Now, the sugya here of Isser is demai. These are amaratzim, and therefore the grain is considered to be demai. Demai is grain which is brought by an amaretz. We don't know if truma was taken from it or not, and therefore it should be usher to eat. So the question is, could you believe this guy to make it not demai? And over here, the halacha is machlokes, and it seems to be the opposite of what we said before. Rabbi Yehuda says that they are trusted, which means he seems to be not concerned that they made a deal between them. And the Chachamim say that they are not trusted, which is the opposite of what we said here. So says Abaye, you have to flip the opinions in the brisa, and you have to flip the brisa to match this case. This case of the drivers was this case of the grain sellers is a Mishnah. So we would change our brisa to match the Mishnah. So that's Abaye's approach. Now, the Gemara says there's potentially another approach. Rav Ada bar Ava, in the name of, it was Rav Ada bar Ava in the name of Rav who said that you have to flip it. It was inverted. Abaye says you don't have to flip it. Abaye says I'll give you a different answer. This second answer is that there's no contradiction between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda really is concerned in the case of most things. When in the case of Demai, where Demai is only necessary Rabbanan, so there he's not worried that they made a deal between them. It's more lenient, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda holds that it's okay. You can trust him that it's not Demai, even though there's a potentiality that they made a deal between them. So the Gemara says that answers for Rabbi Yehuda. What do you do about the Chachamim? Why would the Chachamim be Machmir in that case of Demai and Meko in the case of Kohanim? So the Gemara therefore says you have to give a different answer for them. The Gemara says that it's going to be like an answer given by Rabbi Chama bar Ukva in a whole different case, and that's that they are holding the person who's testifying is holding his own selling tool. It was a tool that people who sold grain used to level off the measure, and they used to walk around with that tool when they wanted to sell. That's what gave indication that their items were for sale. So by this guy holding it, he shows that he's not here to take it to storage. I mean, if he's saying, don't buy my stuff's no good, what's he doing here? So his claim is that I'm not trying to sell anything. I'm just trying to transport it to where I need it to go. That is contradicted by the fact that he's holding a selling tool. Therefore, when we see him holding a selling tool, the Chachamim say, now I'm suspicious. He must be playing a game, and in the next town he's going to sell, and the other one's going to testify that his are okay. In, however, the case of Kohanim, there's nothing suspicious, and therefore I do not suspect that there was a trick happening over here, and that each one is planning to testify for the other, and they're both lying. Okay. Says the Gemara, what was this case of Rav Chama bar Ukva? We said that Rav Chama bar Ukva answered, and somewhere else that it's the selling tool. What was he referring to? So the Gemara says he's referring to a sugya where Talmud Chacham was bringing pottery to sell, and the Talmud Chacham is trusted to be careful that they should be tahar. But the Talmud Chacham went to take a drink, and therefore he left his pots alone. Now, do we have to be concerned that those pots became tamei if he plans to sell them? So we have three contradictory brises here. One says they all are under suspicion of tuma. One says none of them are under suspicion of tuma. And the third one says the ones that are on the outer edge of the pile are suspect, and the ones that are on the inner edge of the pile are not suspect. And Rav Chama bar Ukva explained it as follows. In a case where he's clearly trying to sell them, he's carrying a selling tool, so then people will touch them. Random people in the street are considered to be amaratzim. We assume that they are tamei, and we assume that they're matame them. Therefore, all of them are tamei. In the case where he's not carrying a selling tool and he parks them far from Rosh Hashanah, no one's going to touch them, and therefore we could assume that they're tahar. The case where it's half and half is where he parked them on the edge of Rosh Hashanah. He's not planning to sell. He's not carrying a selling tool. He's not showing he means to sell them, and people aren't going to touch them, but it's on the edge of Rosh Hashanah. A lot of people walking by, their clothing will flap on it, they'll touch it, they'll pass over its airspace, they'll be metameid, but that's only the ones on the outer edge. And therefore the ones on the outer edge are tamei, but the other ones are tahar. Okay, now that is therefore what we learn from there is that if someone's carrying a selling tool, he's announcing that he wants to sell these items and therefore sale. Now, the Gemara has a last explanation of how we resolve the contradiction. The Gemara says that the argument over here between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim is over whether or not if you allow somebody to eat truma, are people going to end up marrying him off as a Kohen? So they both agree that we shouldn't be allowing him to get married as a Kohen. Rabbi Yehuda says, therefore, you shouldn't allow him to eat truma either, because if people see him eating truma or being given truma, they'll end up marrying him off as a kohen, not as a chalal. The Chachamim say no one's going to make that assumption just because somebody's eating truma. Being given truma doesn't mean that they're going to assume he's a kohen for marriage, and therefore you can allow him to eat truma. It's not going to lead to a problem. However, this argument really has nothing to do with the concept of people testifying for each other. That's not the issue. So now the Gemara moves into this whole sugya about can you learn from one aspect of kahuna to another aspect of kahuna. So the Gemara says, let's talk about a few cases. First of all, if you see someone signed on a shtar, if you see someone's name on a shtar and identifying him on the shtar as a Kohen, can you assume based on that he's a real Kohen and allow him to marry under the status of kahuna? So the Gemara says, this is a question that was asked in the base Medrash, and the Gemara said, let's narrow it down. What are we talking about? We saw his name on a shtar. He was a witness on the shtar, and he signed his name as a Kohen. Certainly you can't learn anything from that. No one's testifying. He just decided to write his name, I am a Kohen. He called himself Yankel Shmerel, the Kohen aide. So that doesn't prove anything. So we must be referring to where he was one of the parties on the shtar, and he's written his name as in one of the parties of the shtar, he's written as a Kohen, and then two witnesses signed the document. So the question is, were they signing to the fact that the loan or whatever the shtar is establishing that happened, or are they also signing to every detail of the shtar, including the fact that this man is actually a Kohen? That's the question. The Gemara doesn't answer. The Gemara says, now let's talk about the other thing, though, which is that Kohanim can do Berchos Kohanim. We had already discussed Truma and marriage. The third thing is Berchos Kohanim. So Kohanim can do Nesias Kapayim, that is the special bracha that they give. There's an Isser Asay. They're not allowed to do that if they're not a Kohen. A Yisrael who acts as a Kohen and gives Berchas Kohanim violates the Isser Asay that Kohanim are supposed to do that, which implies only Kohanim and not Yisraelim. So if you see someone doing Berchas Kohanim, can you assume that he's a Kohen as far as marrying them off? So the Gemara says, We'd seen that machlok is whether or not you can learn marriageability from eating truma. We can ask this question about Berchos Kahanim according to both opinions there. According to the one who says that if he eats truma, he's definitely a Kohen. You can use that for marriageability. So maybe that only applies to truma, which is a Isser that carries Misa B'dei Shemayim if a Yisrael eats truma. So a Kohen, if someone is eating a truma, he's definitely a Kohen Yisrael, would not violate an Isser that carries Misa B'dei Shemayim. However, maybe Berchos Kahanim is not a proof because that's just an Isser Aseh. On the other hand, I could ask, according to the opinion that says that eating truma is not a proof, because maybe eating truma is not such a big deal, because eating truma is something he does privately. Nobody sees that, and therefore he feels secure on that. However, Berchos Kahanim, he's not going to do Berchos Kahanim, which is a public thing and everyone sees in shul, unless he's actually convinced that he is a Kohen, and therefore you possibly would be able to learn from Berchos Kahanim to marriage ability. All right, now what's the halacha here? So the Gemara brings a machlokes. The Gemara says it's a machlokes between Rav Chizda and Rabbi Avina. The Gemara says Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak asks Rava, what's the halacha? He says it's an argument between Rav Chizda and Rabbi Avina. What's the halacha? So he said, I have a brisa that should help us establish the halacha. The brisa is Rabbi Yossi talking about when Klal Yisrael came back to Eretz Yisrael after the exile in Bavel. They needed to reestablish their Kohanic status. The reason is because while they were in Chutz La'aretz, many of them married non-Jews, and therefore they had to prove that they were pure-blooded Kohanim. So the psukim there in Sefer Nehemiah discusses what they needed to do. So we have two psukim discussing some of the families that were disqualified. So it says Mibnei Kohanim, so Bnei Chavaya, Bnei Hakot, and Bnei Barzilai, Asher Lakach Mibnos Barzilai Hagaladi, Isha Vayikari al Shemam. So you had the people from Chavaya and Hakot who married the daughters of Barzilai Hagiladi. They came. They looked for some kind of evidence to prove that they were Kohanim. They couldn't find, and therefore they were disqualified from being a Kohanim. So then it says V'yomar haTirshasa lahem. So Nehemiah is called a Tirshasa. Who is called haTirshasa. So he said to them, you can eat Kodesh Gvul, but you can't eat Kodesh Kodashim. That means they could eat Truma, but they couldn't eat Karbanos until Mashiach will come, until there'll be a Kohen with Urim V'Tumim who can establish their actual halachic Kohanicness. So says the Gemara that in a brisa, Rav Yossi says this was based on Chazakah. And the reason is because while they were in Chutz La'aretz, in exile, they were eating Truma there also. There's Truma D'Rabbanan in Chutz La'aretz. So whatever they were eating before, they're allowed to keep eating. We're not going to mess up their Chazakah. However, to actually have them come here now and start eating a Karbanos, that's another level up. We're not going to say that they are allowed to eat Karbanos. What does this prove? Says Gemara, this proves that you cannot allow somebody to marry just because he is doing Berchos Kahanim. Why? Because these people did Berchos Kahanim in Chutz La'aretz as well. So if you're going to allow them to keep doing Berchos Kahanim, which we're saying they're allowed to do whatever they were doing in Chutz La'aretz, then they're going to come here, and they're also going to prove that they are marriageable Kohanim, which means that they're going to end up eating Karbanos also. So what do we help? We made a takana, they should only eat Truma, not Karbanos. They're doing Berchos Kahanim, so we're going to make proof based off that. So Gemara says, obviously, therefore, that's a proof that you can't learn from doing Berchos Kahanim to anything else. Gemara says, not necessarily. It could be that ordinarily you could, but here there's no concern that people will erroneously learn that, and that's because you see that they're not eating Karbanos. They're not being given permission to eat Karbanos. Other Kohanim are, they aren't. Therefore, their Chazakah is weak. People aren't going to learn from the fact that they're doing Berchos Kahanim anything, because you see there's something suspicious here. The Gemara says that has to be the case, because otherwise, how could we allow them to eat Truma and think we're going to keep them from Kohanic privileges in other ways? Didn't we just have an opinion earlier that you can learn from the fact that someone eats Truma that he's a Kohen and allow them to marry as Kohanim? So how does that opinion get understand this? How could Nehemiah say you're allowed to eat truma but not anything else? That's not going to work. Obviously, the reason is because here it's different, because people will see that they're not eating korbanos. Therefore, there's a limit to how much they're allowed to learn from there, and therefore there's no proof as far as that. Says the Gemara, there is one thing they have to explain according to this, and that's if the Kohanim are being allowed to do the same thing in Eretz Yisrael that they were up to now in Bavel, so why is Rabbi Yossi calling this, wow, chazaka is so great, you could keep your chazaka? What's chazaka doing here? They're staying in the same status as they were before. You don't need a paskin chazaka. Why would I think anything would change? There's no shaila. Everything they did before, they're doing now. So the Gemara answer is no, it is going up a level, because up till now, they were only eating truma derabanan, because truma in Chutz La'aretz is only derabanan. Starting now, they're going to be in Eretz Yisrael, they're eating truma deraisa. Chazaka, the fact that they were becheskas, able to eat truma derabanan, allows them to eat truma deraisa. Says Gemara, once you say that, now I have a whole other answer to the question. Is that now, the truma they were eating up to now was truma derabanan. That's why there's no concern that they're going to end up being considered to be kosher kahanim for yuchsin, for nisuin, for marriages, because up to now they're only eating truma derabanan, so that's not going to get them anywhere. Now, they're also only being allowed to eat truma derabanan from this point forward. We're not allowing them to eat truma deraisa. Even though they're coming to Eretz Yisrael, we're saying you're going to be limited to truma derabanan. In the first pshat, which we said before, they're now going to be allowed to eat truma deraisa. And the reason why there's no problem of people learning from that they're kosher kahanim is because there's a bad chazaka, because they can't eat karbanos. But now we're saying that they're going to be limited to truma derabanan, and nobody's going to learn from truma derabanan to kahuna. Now, what's the chiddush of the chazaka? What does it mean when he says, no, it's because you have a great chazaka? So he means to say that you may say, hold on a second, now that they're in Eretz Yisrael, if you let them eat truma derabanan, they may end up eating truma deraisa, we should make a gzeira and aser them truma derabanan. So on that he says, no, it's a great chazaka, because they were becheskas eating truma derabanan up to now, we're not going to take that away from them, even though there's the potential concern. So now the Gemara has a kasha, and that is it true to say that they're not allowed to eat truma deraisa? Now you want to tell me that the pshat is that they're not allowed to eat truma deraisa. But if you look at the psukim, the only thing he told them that they're not allowed to eat is kodesh kadashim. Kodesh kadashim refers to karbanos. That implies that truma they're allowed to eat. So Gemara says, no, it's two different things. It's kodesh and kadashim. Those are two different things. Kodesh refers to truma, like the Torah says, v'chol zor lo yochal kodesh, and that's talking about truma. And kadshim is talking about truma deraisa. And that you see, because it says Bas Kohen Kisil Ishzor He Betrumas HaKodshim Lo Sochel. That's talking about when a Bas Kohen marries a Yisrael, she can't eat Kodshim anymore, and that's talking about Truma, as we've learned in Mesachas Yevamis.